I'm Sarah Jackson, and this is Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. We're getting the gears turning as we talk to the experts on our ever-changing world of internal communications. This season, we're shifting the mindset.
And so that is one of the first trends that we saw emerge is we need a much more efficient way to build our own audiences, target our own audiences, and really remove the middleman. I really think it begins with understanding what drives value to your organization. What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? What moves the needle? And then work backwards.
If we've learned anything throughout this season, it's that internal communicators have so much to deal with. We hope we've offered advice on how to navigate various subjects that pop up in your day-to-day work, but one topic that we've yet to tackle this season is internal communications trends. What is coming? What is on the horizon? I know you're so focused on things you need to do today. How can you possibly have time to look at the current trends? Well, we've broken it all down for you here on this episode. And this week, we're talking to a returning guest on the show, Tarek Kamil, the CEO of Circle, who's also one of our returning sponsors. They've been great friends of the podcast since its beginning. Being in the industry for as long as Tarek has, he's going to be sharing some trends that he's seeing, where things might be headed in the future, and ways that you can take valuable time to look into these trends yourself and stay ahead of what's coming in our industry. Let's jump right in.
Hi, I'm Tarek Kamil. I'm the CEO of Circle.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show again. I know that we've had several conversations over the years and over many seasons, and our listeners always love when we get to talk to you. First of all, I want to thank you for sponsoring the podcast all of these years. We've been able to provide so many wonderful insights and gems of wisdom for our listeners. And so I always like having you on because everyone that we talk to loves to ask the question, what's coming? What's some trends? What's happening in the future? And you're always thinking 10 steps ahead. So thanks again for coming on the show today. If this is the first time listeners have heard about you, can you just give us a little bit of background of how in the world did you get involved in the world of internal communications?
If you would have asked me when I was a child, will you be working with internal comms? There's a 0% chance I would have said yes to that question. I had no idea what internal communications was until probably 8 or 9 years ago. I'd never heard of it. I knew it was a function within organizations, but didn't really understand it. And how I got into it was really accidentally. And I was working to solve this issue around engagement. How do you drive engagement? And my background is very technical. So, from a software perspective, are there things that we can be doing to drive engagement? And the real answer to that question was yes. It really comes down to delivering more signal and less noise, relevancy. And how can we use software to help us figure that out? So that's where it all began. And then once this was developed, the solution was developed, I found a real hunger and need for this inside of organizations. They have a really difficult job of trying to engage very diverse workforce. They could be diverse from a generational perspective, from a function perspective, from a geographic perspective. So it is a really, really difficult problem. And I didn't realize just how difficult until I got into it. I turned to how do brands engage me? And the most engaging brands were, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, Pandora. All of them really do one thing. They make me feel as though I am the only fill in the blank viewer, watcher, subscriber, whatever it is. Everything is tailored to me because what's happening is a society, everyone is busy and there is a real demand on people's time and attention. So, brands that can cut through all of that noise and deliver to you what you need, they are winning the game. And so, Circle is taking that same technology and approach to employee communication. And the way it works is yes, we want to deliver a personalized experience wherever that employee is. So we don't force them to a channel. If they want to spend time on the intranet, great. Let's personalize that for them. If they want to live in Microsoft Teams, fine, they can live there. Email, all of it is tailored to the individual.
I love that. And I love that you recognize, we feel seen now that you talk about how difficult the job that we have and how complex it has become. I want to talk about this because particularly with COVID, we have even a lot of guests on the show that are internal communicators, and they've, from that need to know perspective, have shut down everything that they've been doing and are just focused on COVID because that's right now the one thing that employees need to know. So it's interesting that you bring that up. Talk about this issue of COVID. When you think about, and you've worked with customers now in the thick of it, now we've got the Delta variant. What are some trends that you have seen maybe pick up in the internal comms world due to the impact of COVID?
We've seen a number of things come out of COVID, not all of them negative. I think companies will be much stronger post COVID because it has forced them to really think meaningfully about things that might have been taken for granted. So let me give you an example. How we target communication, the purity of our data, the ability to communicate quickly. All of these things were highlighted because of COVID. So if you think back to March or April or May of 2020, when all this was breaking and it was chaos, the ability for an internal communicator to quickly get the right message to the right person really did not exist. And we are talking with the biggest companies in the world, and they were not able to do this in a meaningful way. And the reason is manyfold, but it's just a lot of evolution, and we've never really needed that. So the idea of I need to communicate to this segment of our employees, and you have to go to IT and put in a request and wait for 3 days to have that audience built for you, that is not sustainable. And we know it now. And so that is one of the first trends that we saw emerge is we need a much more efficient way to build our own audiences, target our own audiences, and really remove the middleman.
Why I encourage people to actually just watch how this goes down is because, Tarek, with you being a CEO and your employees pitching different things to you, would you say that using sort of the pace and the order of how you do demo your product would be a modeling strategy for the internal communicator? Like, okay, here's where we are, but to sit down with leadership and to even facilitate that process of where do we need to end up, it would is again, I know we've seen with COVID that the internal communicator is now in this leadership position, but when I think of leadership, I think of it's also the art of facilitating even a conversation with leadership to agree on what is our vision for how we're going to do internal communication, because even the words are different that a company uses. Can you talk about um, maybe strategies, or how can the internal communicator even get to the vision to even pitch innovation like this?
I really think it begins with understanding what drives value to your organization. What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? What moves the needle? and then work backwards. So if you have a really solid understanding of what is keeping leadership up at night and how you can make their life easier, you now can paint a picture of this is what we could look like. And why I paint this vision for you is because I know it addresses problem A, B, and C, which I've heard you talk about. So you work backwards saying this vision will make your life easier, leadership, in these ways. Now they're excited. They don't really, for the most part, care about how you get there. They care about where you're going. And they're going to trust you to get there the best way possible. That is your area of expertise. So I always recommend really have a solid understanding of what drives value to the company, what's keeping leadership up at night, and how you can make their life easier. Once you paint that, they're really going to lean in, be all ears, and say, yes, this is fantastic. We love the vision. Go forth. But it starts with the end in mind. It isn't about the details. And what we see a lot of time not be super effective is where they come in with a communicator gets excited about features. Well, leadership doesn't care. They really do not care that you can track open rates or click rates more effectively. They care about what's the value that you're trying to provide to the business. Let's start that, keep it very high level. How you get there is up to you, but are we aligned with what you're trying to do?
So if I have identified all these pain points and I want to know what's out there, I mean, how does your team and you stay 10 steps ahead? I mean, again, if in the spirit of innovation and the spirit of thinking about things differently, if I'm underwater with the day to day of getting out the need to know and the information, do you have any you know practical tips or advice for our listener of how do I stay on top of what is coming? I mean, does your team have blocked off time to look at these things? Like, how do you stay so far ahead of the game on some of this stuff?
It's it's an interesting question, and the answer is that we are just nerds about this. We are constantly thinking about how can we make what we do better, and 95% of that comes from communicators, our existing customers, or maybe prospects that we're talking to. When we hear something in that conversation, wow, that's a great idea. Let's take that back and really think through that. So, what they bring to us is pain. Hey, this is bothering me. This is taking a long time. I wish this was easier. We ingest all of that. So, everyone in the company is thinking and listening for these opportunities to innovate. And because we're doing it across multiple organizations, you might hear something from one company and we take that. That's a great idea. Yes. And we can use technology to make your life easier. But then all customers benefit from that. So it's really one of the beautiful things around software, especially cloud based software, is that the whole group benefits. It's a rising tide philosophy. So we want to accelerate innovation around internal communication and have everyone benefit from that.
So when you are working with your customers, I always think that, and I know you also submit to the philosophy that, your biggest learnings come from what we might perceive as failures. And I know they're not particularly failures, but it's just learning. Can you share maybe from, maybe your own team or maybe a customer, what one of their most kind of innovative endeavors or maybe not so innovative endeavors, just so we can learn, hey, as you go down this road to be thinking about things differently, here are some, cautions or learnings that you picked up along the way as if I am an internal communicator, if I'm sitting here listening to this, um, before I embark on kind of the road to the future.
Sure. So it really is baby steps. I think communicators get really enthused and excited about the future, and they love this idea of driving tremendous amounts of value in a new way. They really love it, but it takes time to get there. And so, understanding the series of steps that need to happen. So, there will be a bunch of things that would happen in the beginning that are not sexy at all. And most people might not even know it's happening behind the scenes. For example, giving a communicator the ability to build their own audiences. Leadership won't know this. Employees won't know this. There's nothing visual that people are seeing to say, wow, that's really cool. But the communicator benefits and the company benefits. If I can get out messages in minutes instead of days or weeks, everybody benefits. And we are now saving this person time. And how can they redirect that time in more meaningful ways? So it's really that. It is start with a vision, work backwards, and then understand that these are a series of steps that build on top of each other.
Isn't there an art and a science and kind of a nuance to this when you're innovating where, yep, I'm doing step A, B, and C, but the internal communicator, that's their superpower is to communicate. Have you seen any wonderful examples of very savvy communicators who have capitalized on the process of the steps to build excitement and agency as they're implementing something new?
Yes, yes. I think the best advice I could give is what we see from those communicators where they understand the process and they build in time. So this, let's say step 1 is done. Great. And now we have step 1.1, which is we are going to talk about what we just did for the company here. What's the value that we just created? Let's not skip over this. This is really important. So we want to say, hey, we did this, and we're going to talk about what's the benefit to the business. Let's really communicate that out. And it's not tooting your own horn, it is celebrating we are on a journey and we want to celebrate each milestone in that journey. I think what happens is people are in such a rush to get from point A to point Z, they skip over the opportunities to both communicate about what they're doing and share in the innovation with the rest of the organization and especially leadership, and they just move on to the next step. I think in general, the mentality of internal communicators is way too modest. They do not take enough credit for the work that they do. And if there was one thing that I could change, given all the communicators that we've talked to and worked with and gotten to know over time, it is stop being so modest. You are doing amazing work. It is very difficult, and you don't get the credit that you really should. So, building in opportunities to celebrate your successes is really important. So that would be the first and probably biggest piece of advice I would give communicators.
Well, I remember we had one of your customers, VMware, on last season, and they were talking about the process where they kept leadership excited about this whole implementation of, your software and innovation. It was really interesting how they transformed how they looked at a software integration, right? That this was the opportunity for them to not only showcase kind of the innovation behind their team, but to make it very exciting for all their communicators of how this is going to make your life easier. But they talked about the need to remind the team about this because, and maybe you've seen this, is that a pitfall on the road to innovation that people get weary, right? When things don't quite go right, or, and they talked about it constantly having to remind them, this is what this is going to do for you. So do you see that where people could, is that a pitfall you think where we get excited at the beginning, but once we start to get into some of this stuff that might not be sexy, How do you keep people, can the internal communicator as the leader keep people excited about this despite the long road it might, present?
Yes. Yes. It really all ties back to value. What is the value that we are creating for this business? And where are we going? So this vision, this journey that we're on is going to unlock a lot of value for our organization. And we have to keep reminding people of this because yes, other fires flare up and people get distracted and their attention diverts. So we have to keep coming back to the destination. And the destination here is we are working towards creating tremendous value for this organization. It's not going to be overnight. It will be a series of steps, but don't forget when we are finished, this is what it will look like and feel like. This is the value we will create. And these are the headaches we will help remove for you, leadership, when we are finished.
Speaking of the final destination, what is the next 10 steps that you and your team are running towards? What, with COVID and all this going on, what is the next frontier for internal communicators?
It really is now understanding what the worst possible scenario can look like, which, I just can go back to March, April, May of 2020. That was it. That is the worst possible scenario where we were not ready for this. We did not have the tools to handle this. It's so fluid, and you've got communication that needs to happen all individually, all over different times, different states, federal, cities, counties, locations. Unbelievable what internal comms managed to get through during that time. So I think about that and it's like, yes, that was terrible. And it highlighted opportunities for us to improve as an industry, as a discipline. We can get better. And so it really has provided, I think, a spotlight on the role. And we're seeing that pretty universally. Leadership really understands the value of this function. I think, unlike ever before, they really get it and they really see it. And so, capitalizing on that is the future. Don't give up what you have earned. These things are all tied together. They are listening to you. Paint the picture. Keep going. Don't get back into drowning and very tactical and order taker. Continue to hold on to this role of I am a leader. Doesn't matter what my title is. What we do is unbelievably important, and I am a leader here. And I'm going to take this organization in a way that it's never been, and we are never going to find ourselves in the same situation we were in March, April, May of 2020. If you can take that to your leadership, this is what I'm thinking about. I am being proactive. We are not going to get stuck here again. And here's what I'm doing about that.
You sitting in a CEO seat, right? How do I do that though? How do I not let it slip through with now all, because the work doesn't let up, right? It's now we got the Delta variant. Now the whole mystery around vaccinations and what's going to happen with that. It with the constant barrage of, again, what I was hired to do isn't now what I'm required to do. How do I stay focused again so that it doesn't slip through my fingers and I don't succumb to the overwhelm of all the work?
Great question. And it is much easier to slip back into it than how I'm making it sound. It really is now constantly in your mind, reprioritizing of my time that I have available. What can I be doing to drive the most value for this organization? So, the way you defend yourself against slipping back into order taker tactical is really prioritizing hey, these are the 10 things I could be doing, and I'm going to rank them. Which one provides the most value? So if someone adds something to your list and you know that this is kind of meaningless and it's not a good use of your time, and you ask, hey, of these other 10 things that I think drive tremendous value, which one would you take off the list? That is how you defend yourself. You are constantly reprioritizing value, value, value. So if you are thinking about, this is where I want to take this organization because I've heard you say that these are huge problems for us, liability, people don't know what's going on, inability to communicate in a timely manner, all these things. If you say, I am thinking about solving this problem, it is really hard for someone to come and put something on your list that is going to trump that. But you have to be empowered to push back and say, well, this is my list. What do you want me to take off? And when they have to make that decision, it becomes very clear you are thinking value first. It is a new way to think, and it's not easy. It takes practice. But this is another benefit of COVID. They have trusted you to get them through this really hard time. We want to hold on to that trust. And value is the secret way for you to do that. Continue to talk value.
And this is a change, right, for internal communicators. If they've trained leadership that they're the ones that are the yes woman or the yes man to write this speech, do this, do that, then they almost have to retrain them with this new language of they are going to have to be the ones to lead leadership, I would think, in this new way. If they've trained them one way of this is what our department does, and now all of a sudden we're going down a new innovative futuristic consumer grade path, there's a whole new language that accompanies that type of journey. And in order for my team to get the time to be able to do that and get us out of some of this other stuff, I would say that would be the mentality, right, to go into this, that it's gonna take, like to your point, some time to retrain leadership on what the function of our team and our department is doing.
Yes, except COVID forced this to happen. COVID forced this. There was no retraining required. It was an overnight thing. Tell me what to do with our employees. They turned to you and asked, help us get through this, right? And so it was an immediate, your role is very different. You're not taking orders from us, we are listening to you. And what I fear is that we are going to slip back into order taker mentality. And I hate that. I want internal communicators to hold on to what they have been given. And the way to hold on to that is to be talking value. Anytime it comes up, if you start to sense, hey, we're slipping back into order taking mode and leadership feels good and we're calmed down, and you start getting orders to take, you push back. I can do that, but I'm thinking very high level. I'm thinking driving value. If we work on this, what of this list would you take away? That response is the magic response. It's scary, but it's right.
Well, I love having these conversations. I always think it's so great to have someone sitting in your seat so that we can say, what is leadership thinking and what is the CEO, kind of how he or she operates. I think it gives our listeners sort of the insider scoop so they can have confidence facilitating a vision and facilitating this new language and facilitating, hey, this is how we're gonna drive value to the business. I can't thank you enough.
Of course. Yes. I mean, we love this. We believe so firmly in a different and better way to communicate and engage your workforce. We just nerd out about this. And anyone that can put up with me or our team, kudos to you, because It is a nerd fest, and we just love talking about it. It's very no pressure. It's more just we're excited to share what we have figured out, and hopefully it sparks excitement in the person that we're talking to.
Well, I wanted to put that out there because it's nice to know somebody that has, kind of our insider CEO, personal insider, CEO kind of type. I think is a nice, tool in our hip pocket to have. And like I said, I think to be able to say, "Hey, I heard about this on the podcast. Don't sell me. I just want to know what you what you're all up to, so that I can see where these companies are going," I think would be nice to offer to the listeners, so there's no pressure and they can just learn. But I appreciate you offering to connect with them, and I appreciate your vision and your leadership and your support of this industry, and also obviously the sponsorship of the podcast. So I can't thank you enough, Tarek.
Well, Sarah, it's always great talking to you.
I love that feeling like we're getting the inside scoop with what's coming in our field. So let's continue that scoop with our news segment featuring our good friends from Ragan Communications Leadership Council on how you can use today's episode learnings right now. Let's tune in.
Thank you for having us today. I'm Mandy Zaransky-Hurst, Ragan's Chief Operating Officer and Head of Leadership Councils. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with Jim Ylisela. Jim has been a great friend of Ragan and a partner for many years. Jim is the co-owner and managing partner of Ragan Consulting Group and also Duff Media Partners. Jim, thanks for being here. Today, I want to talk trends with you, especially trends in internal communications. But before that, will you tell us a little bit about your background and your role, and also what Ragan Consulting Group does? I know, your experience is rooted in journalism, but tell us about you.
And as far as Ragan Consulting goes, Mark and I created Ragan Consulting about 5 or 6 years ago. In part because at all the Reagan conferences and workshops, there would invariably be someone who would come up to us and say, "Hey, could you come to our shop and do that writing class for my team, or come teach us about brand journalism or reporting techniques or so forth?" And we would do that. We would take on those assignments ad hoc, and then Mark and I realized that that was probably a business, and maybe we should take that on. So we created Ragan Consulting Group out of that experience.
And Ragan Consulting Group, fondly known as RCG, is certainly doing a lot to help communicators grow their teams and their businesses. Jim, I know that you're working with so many companies and seeing a lot of challenges and growth opportunities. Let's talk about the biggest challenges that you're seeing internal communications leaders facing right now.
Yeah, I would mention a couple that are kind of related. One, of course, is the remote and hybrid and in the office, conglomeration of where people work and how they work, and the return to the workplace. This has been happening, for quite some time, and I think we're getting to that point where organizations are saying, "Okay, well, this is the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future. Some of us are going to be here, some of us are going to be at home, some of us are going to be in other locations, perhaps, and some of us are going to, switch off back and forth." And of course, that puts an additional burden on internal communicators to keep everyone connected and engaged, puts a lot of pressure on managers to be better communicators. So that is a real challenge that has come out of the pandemic that I think all companies are dealing with one way or another. And the other one I'd put in there is, in part because of that, is company culture. I think companies are now as we move into sort of a post-COVID, not really, but kind of getting there. uh, people are organizations are looking at this and saying, you know, who are we? How do we define our culture? We don't work the same way. Um, and how do we continue to, engage our workforce and connect with them and maintain a culture uh, based on a set of values that I think has become even more important in recent years for companies to say this is what we believe in, um, as a way of confronting the other big issue out there, which is how do we hang on to the talented people we have, and how do we recruit new talent to come into the organization? That, I think, that might be the number one issue that companies are facing right now.
Jim, let's turn for a second to the future. I know we've talked a lot about now and certainly the effect of the last 18 months on organizations and culture and communicators, but let's talk about the future of the communicator. If you were to sit in the shoes of a communicator in the future, how do you think their roles, especially for internal communicators, will evolve in just a few years?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I see happening or would like to see happening, and you and I have discussed this at other times. And one of them is, to move into a more strategic role. I know that word gets bandied about, but what we saw during COVID was internal communicators have their moment because they became essential members of the workforce, the connectors of the workforce. And I'd like to see them hang on to that, not just go back to being order takers for what anybody needs to have done at any particular moment. And then the second challenge, I would say, is to take things like DE&I and ESG to the next level. Right now, we're at sort of level one, where we're embracing these concepts. Yes, we care about diversity. Yes, we care about the environment and all these other things. But it's not enough to just say you care about it. You have to actually do something about it. And when you do something about it as an organization, whether it's changing the nature of your board of directors or changing processes that will be more sustainable, I mean, in any number of things, you have to tell those stories. And you have to tell those stories to all audiences. And I'd like to see communicators take charge of that.
And I would argue that internal communicators have always had a critical role within companies. It's just now being appreciated and recognized more. And so, if we were to end with some communications wisdom from you, I know part of it would certainly be tell the stories, but what other communications wisdom do you have for internal communicators?
One thing when we're doing training or working with editorial teams, content teams in companies, one thing we talk about quite a bit is be a better reporter in your own organization. We talk a lot about writing and creating content and shooting interesting videos, the sort of production work. But when you're a good reporter, you know the organization. You are always talking to people throughout the organization. You know who the go-to people are. You know who the experts are, and you know the issues that people are dealing with. This stuff doesn't just show up at your office door or send you a text. You have to go get it. And I think in what I'd like to see, and what I am encouraged to see more of, is communicators adding that to their toolbox. I I can go out and I can connect with people in the organization. When I was a reporter, it was a matter of you're the ultimate generalist. You have to be able to learn about anything in a short time and ask good questions and gather information. And communicators are like that in their organizations too. They've got to really understand what's going on. And the more they understand the finances, they understand the decision making, they understand the products and services, etc. The more they understand that and absorb that, the better they're going to be as strategic counselors to the C-suite than just people who execute communication.
Jim, I couldn't agree more. In fact, something that we're adding as a benefit to our Communications Leadership Council in the next month or so is a business fluency coach that's available to our members, because we know that when senior level communicators are able to speak the language of the other C-suites, they build the relationships faster and they garner more respect. And so speaking the language of many different teams and different pieces of the organization really does make them the ultimate communicator. So I completely agree with you. Jim Ylisela, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing both your experience, your observations, and your wisdom.
A huge thank you to our sponsor, Ragan, Mandy Zirinsky-Hurst, and our featured guests for being a part of our new segment. If you're interested in more information about Ragan's Communications Leadership Council, an exclusive membership for senior-level communicators and their entire communications teams, please go to commscouncil@ragan.com. Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is also proudly supported by the Circle Broadcast Suite, an entire suite built for internal communicators. Learn more at circle.com. Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by the Internal Comms Pro Collective. Don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.